Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to Impressions Gallery for those of you who are here in person, and welcome to those of you who are joining us online through live streaming on YouTube. Welcome. This is really amazing that we can actually do this, so let's start the day. I'm McNeill, and I'm the director and curator, I'm the director of Impressions and the curator of this exhibition, In Which Language Do We Dream? It's an absolute pleasure to joining me this afternoon. It's Rich Wiles, the photographer of In Which Language Do We Dream exhibition. Thank you for coming. Before we start, how this talk's going to run is it'll be an in-conversation for about 40 minutes, then we'll take questions from the floor. If the technology works, when the technology works, I'll also be taking questions from people on YouTube. So if you want to add your questions, again, towards the end on the live chat on YouTube, I'll take some of the questions from the floor, if that's all right with you. Rich, yeah?
Yep.
So, and I also want to thank the funders of this, for this event and the exhibition, which is the Arts Council England. And for this digital part of the talk is the Art Fund Reimagine grant, which we managed to secure during one of the lockdowns to try and do things differently as we go forward. So thank you for that. So I'll start with saying a wee bit about you, Rich. Yeah? So Rich is a socially engaged artist and documentary photographer. His practice explores social issues of our times, often focusing on notions of home identity and in all different contexts. Rich's work has been exhibited in more than 12 countries, including at the Migration Museum London, the Sony World Photographic Awards, the Photo Museum in Antwerp, and the Amnesty International Human Rights Centre in London. Rich has received numerous grants and awards, including the Palestine Photography Award, and has been widely published in the international media and photographic press. You were based in Palestine from 2005 to 2016, and including 7 years living and working in a refugee camp. Rich's participatory work with the camp's children led to the establishment of the Ligi Centre Arts and Media Unit, an award-winning grassroots, youth-led, sustainable participatory photography and film project. Rich also implemented participatory work with groups of women in the West Bank and young photographers in the Gaza Strip, and has run participatory, I can never say that word, has run collaborative projects in the UK. During his early work with the Al-Hadawi family, Rich produced Ongoing Journeys, which was a small exhibition which I originally, that's how I met you about two and a half years ago, which was shown as part of the Hull International Photography Festival, and you also produced an interactive educational web documentary exploring the family's first year in the UK. This interactive project, Ongoing Journeys, was the only UK-based project shortlisted for the inaugural UNHCR Innovation Award. And that's the short bio of Rich. And before we just go on, I'll just say the little bio of the Al-Hadawi family.
I'm glad that was short.
I'm
glad that was short.
So the family that Rich has been working with is Rami, Ruba, and their children Mustafa, Yazan, and Hanan. And in 2012, they were forced to flee Homs, which was their home. Rami had worked in Syria as a driver, and Ruba had, before her marriage, worked in a photographic lab. And they lived in Homs alongside their extended family. They had to flee across the border into Lebanon, and they remained there until 2017, when they were offered the chance to resettle under the British government's VPRS scheme. Later that year, in 2017, their daughter Rayhan was born. Most of their surviving family members are displaced and spread across several countries, although a few still remain in Syria. So that's the context of what we have today. So my first question is, why did you want to do this project, Rich?
I'd been based in Palestine, as Anne said, for a long time. Around the time that I started to think about coming back to the UK, so I eventually got married. I lived in a refugee camp in Palestine for a long time, and lived and worked in a refugee camp. So most of my work in Palestine was around issues of displacement, exile, refugees, these related issues. And when we started thinking about coming back to the UK, there was so much stuff happening, so much talk in the media and politically in Europe about the so-called refugee crisis. And there was huge amounts of images getting produced of what was happening over in Greece, people, in lifeboats, some of the horrendous stuff that people were going through to try and be safe. But I was aware that this was producing a very kind of stereotypical or very standardised issue of what it meant to be a refugee, what it meant to be a displaced person. And my experience, having lived in a refugee camp for a long time, was that it was, we experienced many difficult things living inside the camp, but we also used to have weddings and parties and dance with the kids and play football and do all kinds of other things. And the rest of the story, the rest of the life that I'd experienced wasn't coming out. So there was a very, so I wanted to look at these issues, but in a different way to what was coming out at the time. And there was also, around that time, 2015, 2016, there was obviously also in this country the Brexit thing was happening. And some of the vile use of images of refugees that was used within that very toxic political environment at the time. And the way that the lives of displaced people were being exploited for political gains. I wanted to look at these issues and be involved in that process, in working with people to tell another side or to give a deeper context to that story. Refugees were being painted as one kind of homogenous group of people, and I wanted to work with people to look at families and who they were as individual people and tell a kind of deeper, longer context about that.
And so why was Ruba and Rami in the family?
So my wife, my wife's going through the immigration process in the UK, so my wife's a Palestinian refugee. When we came back in 2016, she then began her immigration process in this country. So we're also going through these same issues ourselves in kind of being stuck between countries and lives and languages and cultures and everything else. Through my wife's colleagues of my wife and through my wife's work, they were working with Syrian families at the time. And the idea that I had of wanting to certainly go out and talk to some Syrian families and find out if anyone had any ideas they were willing to share with me about how we could work together. Through my wife's work, they contacted some of the Syrian families that they were working with. A few of the families agreed to meet me. And when we went, my wife came with me and she was there, she translated. I do speak some Arabic, but it's terrible. So my wife was there to translate to make sure everything was understood by families really clearly. And it was really important that when we did at this stage, that when the project or the ideas, the loose ideas were kind of introduced to the family, that none of the families knew that Serene was my wife, because they already knew her and had a kind of a friendship, a relationship with her. So we didn't want anyone feeling that they had to work with me because I was married to somebody that was a friend of theirs, because this would have, this clearly wasn't fair. So it was
that's a valid point.
Yeah. So at that time, Ramin, when I first met Ramin and we started to talk to them about these ideas, they didn't realise that I was married to Serene. They already knew Serene, who had actually been the interpreter that had met them when they'd landed at Manchester Airport at the start of 2017. So she was one of the first people they ever met in this country. But it was really important that they didn't realise that this wasn't about trying to trick people. This was about trying to be honest and clean and straight with people, and that they didn't feel pressured into working with me. But they almost immediately agreed that, to talk to me, to chat to me, and to collaborate with me, because they were interested in being involved in the project.
So that's it's interesting when you said honest and clean. I think for me, that's what attracted me when I first saw your work in Ongoing Journeys. There was that beginning of a collaboration, and I think you've taken it further in this body of work working with Ruba. I do think, as you said and I've said and Ruba said, this is the family story. So who is Rich to tell? Ruba's lived through this experience and she's the best person placed. So what began as a documentary project very quickly became this collaboration with the family, and then as time went on with Ruba, two questions: how did the collaboration work? And the other question, how did that work during lockdown? I know the answer.
I'm still not sure that I know the answer, to be honest.
Oh, I'll tell you then.
So how did the collaboration with rubber work, or in general with the family?
Well, just when you started, when...
Yeah, so when I started, as Anne said, it did start as a kind of more traditional documentary project, in that I was spending time with the family, whatever it was that they were doing as they were trying to rebuild their lives and get used to life in the UK. I was spending a lot of time with them, like on a weekly basis. I was spending a day or 2 or 3 days sometimes with the family. This involved, I won't say following them around, it sounds like I'm stalking them, but spending time with them as they were doing whatever it was that they were doing. So the kids had started going to school, so I would go to the school with the kids there. Rami and Rub had started going to college, so it was these things that they were going through as they were trying to rebuild their lives. But it was also about introducing them to things, because I understood what they were going through. So when they turned around to me and said, you know, what can we do with the kids? Where can we take the kids for a day out? Then part of the work for me was about me introducing them to different places, me helping them to get on with their lives here, because I understood what they were going through. My wife was going through exactly the same thing at the time, and that she'd only been in the UK a few months. It was all totally new to her. So we were kind of, in some way, hopefully, and Rami and Rubber have told me this, we were kind of, it was like a two-way bridge in some ways, in that the family, my wife's obviously Palestinian, so they had the language, you know, they were both speaking Arabic. I spoke some Arabic, enough to communicate with the family and get on with things. They didn't really have anybody else in this country that they knew, so we were a link to this country for them, but also because of our shared experiences in terms of coming from the same part of the world. Obviously Palestine's a difficult place to live. What happened and is still happening to an extent in Syria has been horrendous. So we had some kind of shared experiences, plus me and Rami both like football a lot, which is always important.
The universal language.
Exactly. So yeah, you know, I began to follow them around. I began to work with them in this way, and with time that developed. So what began as this documentary project, then one day Rami told me about these archive photographs that he had somewhere, and he just mentioned it in passing and then told me this incredible story about this collection of photographs that when they'd fled the house in Homs, they'd left with basically nothing. And then a member of their extended family who'd stayed in the area managed to return to their house after they'd left and found this, the militias had attacked the house after the family had left and you know, smashed it up and everything. Found their belongings were scattered all over the floor, and she found this little collection of printed 6x4-inch photographs, family photographs. She then picked them up. She then became a refugee. She also fled in the same direction as Rami and Rubber, took these photographs with her when she fled into Lebanon, and then found Rami and Rubber again in Lebanon and gave the photographs back to them. So I saw this, and Rami just told me this story in passing one day, and I was sat there with my mouth and my jaw dropping down here, like, this is an incredible story. Have you still got these images? And he's like, yeah, they're in a box upstairs somewhere, you know. So please, can I look at these? So that was that's where it started to move on a little bit from just being about a straightforward documentary approach into something that was a little bit deeper, because these tiny little collection of printed photographs held the backstory and held the visual memories and held the people that Rami had told me about, his dad and his uncle and Rubber's parents and all these people I'd heard Rami and Rubber talking about. I could all of a sudden see them, and it gave the context to a lot of the other work that was about their new lives. So we started to see it becoming something bigger.
Can I just say then, for those of you that are here in person, these photographs have been worked by Rich, and we worked with the children's wards and Rubber and Rami's wards, explaining the photographs, and they're in the cabinets behind you. For the benefit of the people who are watching digitally, you can, after this talk, go online and go onto our virtual reality exhibition, and you'll be able to explore them and see more in depth what Rich was talking about and is talking about.
So yeah, we started to look at these photographs. And in early work, when I had seen the work originally, you know, going back a few years, as it was originally ongoing journeys, I included these photographs or copies of them in the exhibition, but it had to go further than that. And that's what we've been doing more recently over the last couple of years, is kind of extending that collaboration a lot deeper, which is why, as Anne just said, those images have now been reworked, which we'll get onto in the lockdown discussion. They were then reworked during lockdown along with the family to add more of their story and more of their own personal touch inside the work, because obviously it's their story, and they then began to write things about the photographs and include backdrops that they wanted using in the photographs and other things. Over the since late 2019, we started to think about how we could create a new level of this kind of collaboration. And Rubber had worked in a photographic studio in Homage before she'd been married, so it's going back quite a long time, but it's still something that she talks about really fondly. And in one of the archive images that Rubber showed me, it was of her working inside this photography studio in Homage. And she told me about this, and we thought about this and we talked about this, and we had this idea of Rubber coming back to photography, if you like. She was telling me about how she'd love to go back to Syria, how she'd love to go and work in this photographic studio again. And as much as this is a socially engaged project, this project or photography is not going to get Rubber back to Syria. We can't do things like that by itself. What it could do is get Rubber back into photography. And so we then incorporated this idea into the project. And initially, we were wondering about how, if there was a possible way that photography could help support Rubber's integration. And Rubber openly admits that that her English skills, particularly her English skills, haven't developed the same rate as the rest of the family. And the whole process of integration amongst the family has been a fascinating thing to be alongside or part of, if you like. But it's happened at different levels with everybody. So the kids went to school as soon as they got to the UK, and we're all of a sudden surrounded for 8 hours every day by people speaking English, and not just people, but people that they wanted to make friends with. So straight away, the kids wanted to fit in. So straight away, for 8 hours a day, they were hearing English. The school they were with, thankfully, gave them loads of extra support. Nobody understood a word of English from the family when they came here. But the kids started to pick up language quite quickly. Rami did some voluntary work quite early on after getting here, and then as things started to develop, he later got his first job in 2019. So he was also going out quite a bit. Rubber was at college like Rami when she first got here, but then they soon found out that she was expecting their new child. The new family member was coming. And so as the pregnancy developed, Rubber had to stop going to college. And then after Ryan had been born, Rubber was at home looking after Ryan. So Rubber didn't have the same access to either to college or just to getting outside and doing things within society as Rami, and certainly as the kids had had. So Rubber's development of language has been a lot slower, and I'm not...
Yeah, and there's also a picture behind you that sort of shows like Rubber started doing classes online again during lockdown, but again, as everybody must have had difficulties during lockdown when you've got young children in the house. So it's an ongoing...
So we spoke about how we could maybe try and experiment and see if photography could help Rubber to learn more, to go out into society, maybe to make new friends. Maybe it could be a way that an icebreaker, an icebreaker with people, a way that we just wanted to explore these ideas a little bit. At the start of last year, we started this process. We went out together, me and Rubber, and we found a church nearby that was really we did an arts club. And they were really happy for Rubber to go down there and sit around and practice her English with them. So we're already starting to get things moving. And this was January last year. And then, of course, March last year came, and everything stopped. Everything just changed kind of overnight, as it did for everybody, So we had to rethink about how this was going to work. The first thing that we did was sat down, and I'm going to say sat down together and talked. We didn't sit down together and talk. We sat down the other side of technology and spoke to each other via the phone and spoke a lot about, did they still want to continue being involved in this project? Did we need to stop what we were doing? How could it work or how couldn't it work? And we decided that obviously the whole idea of integration under lockdown, when you sat inside your house, kind of becomes redundant in many ways. Because how can you integrate into society when you're being told you can't speak to people, or you can't even stand within 2 meters of people, or you've got to stay inside your house? So how photography could support integration when integration itself wasn't really possible at that time was a whole separate question. So instead of that, we thought, we'd done a lot of workshops before lockdown had hit, and we'd looked at loads of different work that had been produced particularly by female photographers from the Middle East and from different places around the world. And Rubber had got a lot of ideas. We talked about a lot of ideas of what she could do with photography. And then obviously, like I say, lockdown hit. The kids were at home all of a sudden. There was 4 kids in the house. Rami continued to work, so he became one of many unsung key workers that we heard very little about right through lockdown, low-paid key workers that kept the country rolling whilst working as a takeaway, working in takeaways in a kitchen for a restaurant. So Rubber was at home with 4 kids, and so we couldn't look at this idea of integration, or she couldn't continue going to these English classes that she was getting at the local church. So instead she turned the camera inwards, for use of a better phrase, and photographed what was around her every day, her daily life with the children, and has produced, I think, some amazing work.
And I think sometimes out of circumstances that you don't predict, or we've ended up with an incredible body of work. Yeah. One is, works on so many levels. One is just a documentary of the times when the world closed down and what was a family doing, and then it's also the experience of what internally is happening. So I think I don't think it's a bad thing lockdown happened. I think it's made the project different from how it was discussed at the beginning or how it was imagined, and it's become something else. And that's often the way with when you're making work. You just respond to internal and external circumstances and go with it. So I think it's really strong, because we're now seeing Ruba, how she sees her family and the children. And as Ruba says, photography stays with you forever and they bring back memories. I mean, that quote from her is always stuck in my head, and this is what this, as a document of the time, as a document about identity and integration, it works, but it also works on that personal level. Yeah. And one does get emotional having been away from the gallery for over a year, but one of my best moments in this building, at Impressions, happened a month ago, because part of the project was the team and me were going to spend time with Ruba, do what Richard said, show them different photographs, particularly women photography. This obviously couldn't happen during lockdown, so it was just sort of done. You were the conduit when we used to have our weekly Zoom meetings. Yep. So I know this family inside out, because I've spent 18 months with them. I've seen thousands of photographs of them. When they eventually came to the gallery a month ago, I was like, don't burst into tears, I think you're mad. It was brilliant. It was just, they had come to life, and I felt really privileged that they had, Ruba had trusted me and an institution with all her photographs when you were making the work, and I think that comes down to your relationship with them as well when you introduced a third party. But the thing, and this is the thing that made me think, this is why I do it, this is why galleries like Impressions exist. Ruba said to me, can I film in this gallery? I'm like, it's your show, you can do what you want. And she went round every single photograph on WhatsApp to some of the family members that are still in Syria. And that's the power of photography.
Yeah, she video called her sister who was in Syria and walked around the full exhibition with her, which, Yeah,
it was just one of those moments when you think, it was so powerful. And that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. This is why Anne does what she does. This is why Impressions does what Impressions does, and this is why I do what I do. Photography, to me, and I know to Anne as well, is not just about famous photographers and getting huge print stuck on a wall. This should be something, photography, that's for everybody. And it's not just a thing that's done by, in inverted commas, photographers. It's a thing that's done by people. And it means lots and lots of different things to lots of different people.
So maybe that leads on to a question about photography and describing yourself as a socially engaged photographer. What does that mean to you, being a socially engaged photographer?
The phrase socially engaged photography is something that's kind of developed, I think, relatively recently. This type of practice, I've heard it called loads of different names over the time that I've been doing this sort of stuff. Now we're hearing a lot about socially engaged photography. This type of practice to me means something that's kind of rooted very deeply in collaboration. My kind of background in photography, when I was studying photography, and this was as a mature student, a little bit mature,
Sorry, I
My
laughed.
interest, don't laugh. My interest, and this was good at 2001, 2002, my interest was in people like Don McCullin, very black, grainy, very gritty, black and white, social documentary type photography, often war photography as well, so the stuff that had come out of places like Vietnam, the Korean War, the various places that people like Don McCullin had visited. But those times are very different to now, because we now live in a world where everyone's taking photographs, and we're living in a world that's totally oversaturated with images. We see images constantly, we're bombarded with images constantly. And I think the power of an individual photography is still massively powerful. But I think the power of an individual to actually, an individual image to actually create social change has probably been diluted a little bit, because when a war happens, when there's a disaster, when something like this happens, we can now watch it. It can now be live streamed onto your TV screen, and you can sit at home and watch that. The use of images in the world globally has changed. So I became more interested in if I couldn't take a single image that would change the world, how could photography itself, maybe not a single photograph, but how could the process of photography itself be a cog in the wheel of kind of positive social change? And this to me is kind of at the root of my practice and of what socially engaged practice means to me. It's how can the process or the practice of photography be part of something constructive in society that can lead to social or political change. So it's deeply embedded in process, but it's also about collaboration and about challenging the kind of inherent power structures that there are in photography. This idea that there's one person taking the photograph and one person being photographed. How can we challenge this power that's held by that photographer? And by definition, because I'm thinking about the power structures within photography, it's then because I'm also thinking about the power structures within wider society that need to be broken down. So photography can be part, I hope, of that process.
Do you think photography could be an agent for change?
Massively. I mean, but as I said, not in the way maybe that it could have been 50 years ago, in that a photograph could change, maybe create some kind of political change. I think the power of that has possibly been diluted a bit. But I think the process of photography can certainly, as any cultural practice can be, whether it's music or art or visual arts, poetry, whatever it is, yes, it needs to be part of social change massively.
So if we're talking about social change, how do you think this exhibition and your work sits within the trope of challenging the toxic images that are out there of refugees? And we're all aware of them. I don't need to describe them. They're in mainstream media, they're on the news, and it's a very, very lazy shorthand for a story that some of the mainstream media want to get across. So, I mean, I think it does, but I was just wondering how
this is just a family trying to live the life, which I would hope is something that most of us can relate to, and that we've all got family or friends, hopefully, and we want to live a life in safety, which is, that's on a very simple level. But clearly, as you can see through the images, is what this family's just trying to do. They're just a normal family that were put into was forced on them what should be a very abnormal situation, in that, a war, a conflict began. They were forcibly displaced from their home, from their lives, split up from the family. All these things happened. And then they're an inspiration in the way that they're trying to rebuild their lives. And as Rami and Rubber always tell me, the only thing that's important to them is that they can bring their children up somewhere safe. And that's what they feel that they've now got in the UK. But it's not perfect. It's not, it was never what they wanted to do. They'd never ever considered the idea of leaving their homes. They'd never wanted to do this. I'm trying not to swear here. The things that the media put out, I'll use the word things instead of what I was going to say, the stuff that the propaganda that the media put out about, and the Brexit posters that we saw and all this kind of stuff about people coming to steal jobs, and everyone's desperate to get to the West or to get to Europe because it's the only place in the world that's worth living, and all this type of stuff. Rami and Rubber wanted to bring the kids up in safety. It's quite simple, and that's an opportunity that they've had in this country that they're very happy that they've had, and they're doing they're inspirational in the way that they're trying to rebuild their lives, as are, and I should make this very clear, this is not a sole case. This is not that Rami and Rubber are doing this and their kids and nobody else is doing it. This is what people want when they are forced into exile. They want to be able to live safely somewhere.
I mean, the quote above us from Ruba, I think, don't know if you can see it, the online audience, and I can only see the last bit of it, but, Ruba says, we feel happy here, but we really miss home. And I think, that's got to be, that's so true. You mean, think of everybody that's been displaced and had to flee your home. How would you feel? And so that brings me going back to when you talked about the archive photographs. More, in archive photographs, they were family photographs, they were precious objects. And I want to talk a bit, again, for the benefit of the online audience, you can go to our YouTube channel after this talk and watch the WhatsApp film where Ruba and Rami talk about their extended family members and what the photographs, because everybody's dispersed, their communication is through photographs, isn't it, and phones.
Yeah.
So, and for the benefit of the people here, if you stay after this talk, we'll turn the sound back on for the specially made film. Do you want to say something about that then, how the communication between the extended family?
Yeah, so, and this again goes to the importance of photography, I think, or the screen, or however you want to look at it. As Anne said, all the family live very close to, surrounded by the large extended family, as is kind of tradition in the Middle East. Were displaced in several different directions, and some were internally displaced within Syria. So this huge family unit got fragmented across several countries, and the way that they've kind of tried to continue, the way that they have continued their family relationship is through things like WhatsApp, taking regular photographs of each other's kids, sending photographs via WhatsApp all around the world to brothers, sisters, cousins, etc. So again, this goes into the importance of, and the interest for me in photography, and I know I'm very similar in this, that these are the social uses of photography. This is the power and the importance of photography, in that if it wasn't for photography, it wasn't for mobile phones even, and the internet and photography and the way that all these things link together, Rami and Rubber and the kids wouldn't have had any contact with their family for many, many years now. So it's the one thing that in the way that they had archive photographs showing how their life used to be, these new family archive photographs are now being created on the telephones, which are sending backwards and forwards to each other. So when Rami's brother was married a few months ago, he watched it via WhatsApp. When anything happens in the family, when a new child is born, sadly, when if somebody dies, one of Rubber's sisters died at the start of this year, and the phone is the only link. Photographs, phones, videos are the only link to all these things that are happening in the family. So all the family now in the different countries that they're scattered in around the world keep in touch with each other via mobile phones. And some of the images that you can see on the WhatsApp film, when you get to watch that afterwards, when we started to collect these images, Rami and Rubber were making a phone call to Turkey, and then they were making a phone call to Syria, then they were calling somebody in Lebanon. There was this whole kind of global process going on to family members of let's all collect photographs and let's get involved in this process, which I just think is amazing. And obviously, technology, these things can now be sent backwards and forwards in an instant. So it wasn't just myself and Rami and Rubber and the kids kind of collaborating on this. This went much further in that cousins and nephews and nieces and brothers and sisters all kind of got involved in this project across many countries. Photographs can fly, images, ideas can fly, even when people are divided by borders and by conflicts and by wars. Ideas and images can still fly.
And I also think that thing about, we said it was important at the beginning, Ruba's voice is in the photographs, and that's why we made a decision not to say this one's by Rich, this one's by Ruba, because it is a collaboration. Another thing was important for us was that, we do talk about shorthand photography, said that voice is heard. Well, it was really important, like when there's not a talk on, you hear Ruba and Rami's voice going round the room, so there's a constant presence, and their voice is them explaining the photographs, and I think that's...
We spoke about this when we were talking about originally putting the installation in, how we didn't want to do it with headphones. We didn't want someone to have to sit down to listen to their voice. We wanted that when you walked through the door into the gallery, you heard their voice. That had to be, this noise, this voice, this sense, had to be kind of current all the time.
Yeah, and it's their presence. It's the first thing that you experience when you...
I think that's really important.
Yeah, when you walk towards the gallery. So let's talk about the title, In Which Language Do We Dream? Because it's very evocative and very poetic. So where's that come from?
So it obviously ties into various... This is where I'm going to pick my phone up and show you the importance of telephones. It's a quote from Mahmoud. Well, it's not a quote. It's my interpretation. It's taken from the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish, who we may or may not know. Mahmoud Darwish was a Palestinian poet. Obviously, I lived in Palestine for a long time. My wife's Palestinian. He was a leader of what was called the resistance poetry movement in Palestine. He was someone that had experienced exile and displacement, dispossession himself, and a lot of his work was about, sadly died, was about dispossession and exile and home and family and these type of issues. So I'm a huge fan of Mahmoud Darwish's work. It's been translated into dozens of languages, and if you don't know it, then you should know it. So please go out and have a look, Google and listen, read some of this work. So it was from a poem that he wrote called Homage to Edward Syed, another person that had been hugely inspirational, whose writings, for example, have been hugely inspirational. Edward Syed, again, if you don't know him, did things like Orientalism, wrote about Orientalism, cultural imperialism and these type of things. Again, hugely important to me and to millions, thousands, millions of people around the world, his work. So I'll read you the quote where this idea in my head came from, because I didn't want to get it wrong, which is why I'm doing it this way. I am from there, I am from here. I am not there and I am not here. I have two names which meet and part, and I have two languages. I forget which of them I dream in. And when I reread that, it kind of chimed on so many levels into what a lot of this work and this stuff that I was doing, that we were doing together, was about. As I said, my own children are getting brought up somewhere between these two different cultures and two different languages. My wife's stuck in the middle of this. Rami and Rubber are stuck in the middle of this. And as I said about the kind of process of integration, if that's the word to use, when you look within the family itself, you hear the two different languages going on at exactly the same time inside the house. If they're all sitting down watching the football or the telly or eating a meal, the kids will be speaking to each other in English while Rami and Rubber are speaking to each other in Arabic. And then if Rami Rubber asks the children a question, she'll ask the question in Arabic, and then it'll get bounced back to her in English, and then change to Arabic, and these kind of things are all on top of each other. So I just think it fitted into all this stuff, plus the reference to Mahmoud Darwish and the reference to Edward Syed.
What's next?
What now, or?
No, I know what's next now. Next. I'll be opening it up to people from the floor to ask questions. And then we need to sort out a technical thing so we can get people from YouTube, but Karnjit can sort that out. I meant for you, what's next?
So this work isn't finished. Watch this space. Obviously, this is not work for the sake of work. This is a relationship that we've got. Our two families have come very close together. We've become very close friends through the time that we've spent together. And we spend a lot of time together, having fun, even without. My camera's always there, but it often stays in my bag, and I just kind of leave it there whilst we just live our lives like people do. But the work hasn't finished with the family. This is and will continue. Anyone that's done long-term projects will know how difficult it is to know when there's actually a time to draw a line, and that's something that I struggle with massively. But this is still ongoing, and I'm also thinking through new projects, although finding it incredibly difficult to find the way to move on, having been engaged in this basically since I came back to the UK, So I had my work that I was doing in Palestine for many, many years, and was terrified in many ways about coming back to the UK because that was all that I knew, and I didn't know what I would do when I came back here. And then I pretty much got involved in this work as soon as I came back, so it's occupied most of my time over the last more than 5 years. So yeah, it's difficult to come up with that next idea, if you like. So this work is continuing, and I've also started very tentatively to think about and to develop new work, which is looking at the same kind of similar related issues. So all of my work is generally about home, identity, exile, these type of things. So it will be something related to those issues, but I can't say much more yet because I haven't quite worked it out myself yet.
Thank you. Kanjit, can you, when I turn this on, the sound from here is getting played back on that, so I can't crawl down, pretend, do it seamlessly, just run past the camera. So while we're waiting to turn the sound off, I guess, does anyone have any questions? And the way it's going to work, again, so that the people at home can hear it, is Ali, you ask the question, I repeat it for the sake of it being recorded. So,
okay.
Thanks.
Hi, Rich. I was thinking when you talked about not knowing when to stop the project, what is it you still feel you have left to say?
So for the benefit...
It'll be translated into English.
So the question was, you saying, it was like, how do you know it's not finished, or?
No, I know that feeling of people saying, when will you finish this project, and thinking, blind panic, I don't want to. And I wondered, what is it that you still have left to say? If
So
you
the
continue to work, you must feel there is something you still need to say.
So the question basically is, because Richard said, in which language do we dream isn't finished and you're carrying on. And the question is, so what is it that you feel still has to be said?
Yeah, I think fair. I'm going to quote you directly here. The question was, what have I got still to say? And I don't mean to sound, flippant in any way with this, but the whole work's not necessarily about what it is that I've got to say. It's partly about what I've got to say and what I think, but it's very much a collaboration. So it's not necessarily about what I've got to think of how, in terms of how to continue. What's still to be said? It's a good question. I don't know if I've necessarily got the answer for it. But I don't think it's specifically that I've got something, or that we've got something that still needs to be said. I think it's more that things are constantly evolving. Things, constantly in any family unit. Obviously, I could spend the rest of my life taking more photographs, and new things would continually happen. In which case, it'd never be a finish to the project. But I think part of the value is to see in this type of work is that because it's been done over quite a sustained period of time, to see the growth of people. How things do continue to change over time, and I'm interested to find out how within the family, and Rami and Rubra and I and Syrian, my wife, we speak about this, what's going to evolve for them. They don't know what's going to come next. When they were originally brought to the UK, they were given 5 years leave to remain in the UK, which will run out very, very soon. They're not going to, originally they didn't know if after that 5 years they would get thrown out of the country and sent back to Syria. They didn't know what was going to happen. It seems now that they're not going to be told that they have to leave the country, because Syria still clearly isn't a safe place to go back to. But things evolve and change all the time, and they're not really aware yet of what their future's going to be. So what have I still got to say? I really don't see it like that, because I don't think that I've specifically, apart from the original ideas behind the project, I don't think a lot of this stuff comes from specifically something that I had to say. I think it's just a kind of natural development, a natural progression of work. And I think it's lovely to see the fact that you can see Ryan in images a week after she came out of hospital, when she was born, And then you can see Ryan now standing alongside the canal as a big person, you know, now that she's 3-4 years older. And I just think that's wonderful, just to see the development of people, the growth of people, and to be part of that on a personal level.
That's the one, speaking of Ryan, again, who I'm very fond of. I love that one of her, when she got the house back after all her brothers and sister went back to school during lockdowns, and it's just kind of like, this is me, I've got my...
Yeah. I mean, I met Ryan, the first time I met Ryan, she was about 3 hours old. It was wonderful. I went to the hospital to meet her, and she's now amazing and funny, and, you know, I love spending time with her. And growing up, starting to speak a lot of English now, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in terms of language, in terms of where the kids go next, in terms of how things develop. I'm never going to find an end for this, am I? I need to realise that, I think.
Thank you. I've been telling you that forever. The other thing is, speaking, the big issue, went and interviewed the Al-Hadawis and Rich as well, and this is just a little thing, knowing Ryan and her personality, how they end it, what everybody wants to be. So Mustafa wants to be Ronaldo, Yazan wants to be Messi. I hope I've got that the right way round. Hanan wants to be a ballet dancer, and what was it they said about Ryan?
And Ryan just wants everyone to follow her rules because she's the boss, which I think is pretty, I know that's pretty accurate. And when I sat down and read that to Rami and Robert, to all the kids, they all burst out laughing and then said, "No, that's right." She's nailed it exactly. That's exactly right.
So I'll need to borrow Kanja again because the chat stopped at 2:30. Oh, the chat didn't stop at 2:30. So we'll go to Denise.
I've got a question relating to the title, because my dad is a migrant, and when he came to this country, he dreamt in Arabic, and now he's 86, he dreams in English. And he talked about that as, first of all, he dreamt technical terms related to his job. They were English words that started dropping in. And then by the time he got into his sort of 40s, he was dreaming more and more. So there was actually a kind of tipping point where we started to dream English. And now Arabic's quite rusty, really. I think it's there, it's old-fashioned, quite rusty Arabic. So there is some kind of mental journey that people do address that question. And maybe it's a kind of 7-up approach where you keep going back and asking same question. I don't know.
I'm not going to repeat that because it was a really interesting statement about at which point do you change from your original language into the secondary language of the place that you're living. So in this case, Denise's father from Arabic used to dream in Arabic when he first settled here, and now it's in English. And so the question, to summarise it, is, I guess in relation to this being an ongoing project, it's the distance of time that will also add something to it. It's an ongoing question.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this discussion with Syrian, with my wife, about which language. I mean, the idea of the title for the project is not kind of a give me an answer to this question. I'm not asking specifically which language do you dream in. It's kind of metaphorical. But I do have this discussion I was talking a week or two ago about Syrian with this, about which language she actually dreams in. And I don't, I'm not a psychologist or someone that understands a great deal about dreams, but Syrian was telling me that she dreams in Arabic. And I was just trying to think about it, and I was thinking, do I even dream in English? Because do I have conversations in my dreams or not? I'm not sure if I do. I don't know. As I say, I'm not a psychologist. I don't understand these things. But I know that in my dreams I have ideas which I would then interpret in English. You're getting quite deep now. Which I would interpret in English because I'm first language English speaker, but I'm not actually sure if I hear things in my dreams or not, or I just have ideas. I don't know, this is getting really deep and interesting. I don't know. When Syrian tells me, and when Rami and Robert tell me that they're now dreaming in English, maybe that's the point to stop the project. Who knows? Maybe that's the cut-off point. I don't know, it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting.
But they'll never stop dreaming. They'll slip in and out, even if it's rusty. As Denise has said, I don't think you'd ever stop. I still dream in Scottish.
Wow. Wow. don't know. That's really interesting. I've never had this discussion with anybody before, although I have asked Serena a lot about which language she dreams in, but I've never heard anybody talk about almost a cut-off point. So this is fascinating. We need to talk more
and does
about
that,
this.
if there is a cut-off point, this is hypothetical, does that mean you're finally integrated? I mean, I don't believe that, but it's like that could lead.
I mean, because you never. I mean, integration's a horrible word, I think. Anyway, because I don't even know what it means, and it's just another word that's been badly misused and misrepresented. Because people should never give up their fundamental identity unless they want to. And if integration's implied as being something that is involved in that process, and I feel really uncomfortable with it anyway. My wife is Palestinian, and she will always be Palestinian. And if she gets a British passport, she'll be Palestinian then too. I'm sorry, but
No,
this is the way it is. That's
No
her
need to
identity.
apologise.
That's where she was born, and a piece of paper is not something that controls who somebody is as a human being. It's not that piece of paper that says you're from this country or you're from that country or you've got this right to live here or that right to live there. That's all nonsense, sadly. An identity is something that comes from deep inside people, and it's up to each individual person to shape that as they want to shape it, I guess.
Talking about identity and you said your work's always about home and notions of identity. We have a creative activity out there, which during the summer holidays a lot of children and young people are doing. And the question is, what does home mean to you? And adults are doing it as well. And it's just really amazing to hear everybody's different notions of what home means to them. And a lot of it's safety and comfort and love. It's kind of the universal thing, responses that people are coming back with. Yeah. Does that mean we're not? But we'll carry on. Right, okay. Any other questions? Jean? I don't actually personally know everybody, but it is a nice feeling. It's a really nice feeling. You're all welcome. Jean?
It'd be nice to know a bit more about the process of deciding on the authorship of individual images and the exhibition as a whole. You touched on that when you said about there was a decision like this isn't your photograph, Rich, this isn't Ruba's, but it's both of your work. Could you just say a bit more about how you arrived at that decision, or how that kind of process went in kind of like figuring that authorship stuff out, because that is about kind of power dynamics as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't know if you needed to repeat that question for
Yeah, I do. So the
online.
question was about the notion of authorship, whose photograph is who, and because, and the notions of a power dynamic. So how was it decided that there would all just be one body of work? We spent a lot of time. Well, no, I would say right from the beginning, we both knew there shouldn't be a delineation between whose photograph it was. And one of the original thoughts was to have the children's, to have Mustafa and Yazan and Hanan's photographs in the exhibition as well. But there was too many, so we're going to have a newspaper that's going to be launched at the International Symposium, which I'll tell you about at the end of this talk. So we put that to one side. We both, and I think it's fine, we both found it so difficult selecting not in person, because the way I've always worked, I always see curation like collaboration as well. So it's a dialogue with the photographer, the artist, or whoever, the work, and what it is you want to see the final exhibition looking like. The way I've done it and the way you've always done it is you look at all the photographs, you discuss, get it down to about 500, 600 small little prints, and then you get into a big room. Unfortunately, I do have a big room here. And you put them all on the floor and you start to see the dialogue and what's happening. Obviously, when we came to do the selection, it was the third lockdown, so I had to put them, I don't have walls big enough in my house, so I had to put them all over my front room floor.
I've got a 3-year-old in my house, so they weren't going on my floor.
Thank you. So Rich stuck them up, and then we had to do it via Zooms, and it is so hard, isn't it? But I think because we'd been working together for 18 months, we understood where each other... Rich understood why it was important to Impressions Gallery. I just stopped saying I. And I understood what the message and the communication we wanted through the photographs. So it was just dialogue and talking. And then it became very clear that by putting in the children's photographs, it sort of upsets the narrative, not upsets, but it was bringing something in that was quite hard to then translate, hence we'll do it in a newspaper. And then it just started through the discussions, didn't it? And like that thing, like, we don't want that power dynamic stick, you know. I think they're all equally important in telling the narrative and the story, and I know you feel that as well.
No, I mean, the tiny little photographs that are in the cabinet over there that were from mobile phone photographs that Rami and Rubber took while they were in Lebanon. I mean, some of those images are, the file size is so small because they've been sent backwards and forwards across WhatsApp, and it's been squashed and squashed and squashed and squashed every time it's done. So they couldn't be printed any bigger than this. And they're just as significant and just as relevant as a kind of 1 metre print that's sitting in a beautiful frame and printed on a wall. It's not about that. It's about the fact that each one of these images is part of a story of one family's life. And that's images taken by Rubber, images taken by myself, images taken by various other family members, or sent or sourced from different family members. And it's just been a huge collaboration. So you know, authorship, I don't know, it's a complicated one to actually to think about. We've spent so long sitting down and thinking about how to do this in the best way that we could. It's been, you know, say challenging. It has been challenging, but it's also what this work should be about, because it's a collaboration.
And the other thing I think is really important, once Rich and I had come to some kind of decision, but let's keep the dialogue going, Rich would then go and visit Ruba and Rami and say, like, this is, you know, the pictures that we're thinking, then they could have input as well, because that's an important...
And that's been right down to every, you know, spread that's gone in a paper or anything. Anytime that any work's going out, anytime that we're doing curating the exhibition, whatever we've been doing, that's the next stage of the process as well, is that it has to go around all of us that are involved in this.
And same with the captions.
Yeah, and then we had it with the captions.
So the extended exhibition guides, which are in English and Arabic, which you can pick up and walk around. I sort of did the curatorial overview, but then Rich, and then Shireen, Rich's wife, translated it for Ruba and Rami. Same back, it's like Ruba got to write about every single photograph.
Yeah.
So it was collaboration as much as we can. Yeah. I mean, we're still figuring it out, and I think it's a brilliant way to work and want to carry on.
No, this is all a work in progress, and I'm not necessarily meaning this project, but this way of working. I don't think, or certainly in the way, I've been doing this for quite a long time now, but I don't have any hard and fast rules of this is the way that you do it, and it's that straightforward. It isn't. It's a constantly evolving process, and we've tried to make it as collaborative as we could on every level. And I'm sure there are ways that we could improve that, or we can develop it further. We can take it in new ways. As Anne said, the text for all of Rubber's images that are on the wall, we haven't, as somebody pointed out, we haven't put names of who took which photograph, because that isn't relevant to us. It's relevant that they're part of the story. But in terms of photographs that Rubber did take, she wrote individual captions for all of her images and explained why she wanted to take that photograph. When we did rework the archive photographs, each one of those was, I won't say given back to a family member, because they were never taken from a family member. But in terms of when we produced those, and that was done kind of in the heart of lockdown, when we couldn't spend a lot of time physically sitting together. So Rami and Rubber and the kids got a particular image that they wanted to talk about. We looked at who was inside that image. If it was a photograph of Hanan, then Hanan went off and chose what the backdrop to that photograph was going to be. And so she chose a particular dress, and I could collect that dress in a carrier bag from the front door of their house without going inside their house and take it back to my house.
I was the COVID police. I was like, are you sure? And he was like, I didn't go in.
And then Hanan, because it's her that's in the photograph and she chose the backdrop, she would then write about herself in that photograph. And there's all kinds of stuff tied into that, in that Hanan's talking about a photograph. In the particular image of the passport photograph, Hanan, she was a few weeks old when that photograph was taken. So she's not actually writing from memory. So there's also these other layers of the fact that things do change. There was a certain thing that happened, and then over time, memory changes, nostalgia plays a role in this. Particularly, I've gone through it a lot with displaced people and the way that they have particular memories of home. I've had this with, Syrian. I've had this with myself when I've been living in Palestine, and I've had this, these ideas about, I can't wait to go back to the UK because, and then when you get back, you find out it's not really like you remembered it was. Things change. So that was a whole really interesting process. But yeah, the collaboration, each one of those archive images was done by the person who was photographed within that original images. They wrote about, they chose the backdrop for it, the WhatsApp images, the WhatsApp films, sorry, again, it's Rami and Rubber telling their own story. So we've made it as collaborative as we could on every level. But there's no hard and fast rules to this type of work. It's a work in progress, and it's a kind of continuing research that if we can evolve it further and develop it in an even better way, then we will
as you
do
said, we're
so.
still learning. We don't have all the answers. So those are the bongs, but I'll take one more question before wrapping it up. For the bongs you don't know, that's how we always time our day. Impressions from here to City Hall. One more question? Okay, I'll wrap it up now. So I'll end with the thank yous. Thank you once again to our funders, who I mentioned the digital aspect of this, and the VR exhibition has been funded by the Art Fund through the Reimagine grant. The exhibition for you to make this body of work was funded by the Arts Council through National Lottery, so I want to thank the Arts Council. I also want to thank the Arts Council because they fund the work that we do here at Impressions. And I'm saying this not just because Denise is in the audience. I do want to thank Denise, who was quite a pillar of advice, who met Rich independently of me meeting Rich. She met him at a refugee event in Leeds, and really put your backing when it was still, a discussion, and moved this further on and helped very much and advised me and Rich on how to get the grant that's made it possible. So thank you, Denise. I've got a couple of other things to say. These discussions that we're having are going to continue. We've got an international symposium on the 18th of October, is that right? And the questions are going to be, how might photography ethically and imaginatively respond to refugee stories? How do displaced artists work between cultures and across borders? And can photographs help change the traditional media narratives around forced migration? And like today, it's going to be a hybrid event online and in person. And our speakers, as well as Rich, we're going to have Tyson Bajanit, Ali Bouzair, Gohar Dashti, Andrew Daxon, who are all photographers who are dealing with notions of displacement or refugees' experience, ethics, representation, and a Syrian writer who's now based in Leeds called Untitled. So all those details are on our website as well. So that should be a really good discussion that will follow on.
I think it'll be
As I mentioned, the newspaper that we're working on at the moment will be launched at that symposium, and that will have the children's photographs in it. The week before, we're having our very popular annual book fair. Again, the theme of that is the notion of home. So that's on the 9th of October. So I just left is the thank yous. Thank yous, obviously, to you, Rich. It has been a pleasure working with you.
Why are you laughing when you say that?
No, because I mean it. It has been sorry. It's been
Likewise.
great.
Likewise.
Why you're laughing? Obviously, thank the audience. Thank you for coming along back into this space. It means a lot to us here, the team here. And again, I'll just finish with Ruba's words, which I just resonate so much, and that's photographs stay with you forever. They bring your memories back. And I just think for all we talk about photography, that's such an important, crucial. So thank you. And I'm sure any more questions, you're hanging around for a bit.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Anne.
Thank you, everybody.